Welcome to Florida Focus, a college football podcast. My name is Brandon. I'm a lifetime Seminole fan, and we're going to let you continue in our conversation as Chris, Jarad, and myself, Brandon, cover the rest of the 2022 recap into 2023 season. This time we're focusing on the UCF Knights and the Miami Hurricanes. Thank you so much again for their loyalship. FloridaFocusPodcast.com.
And I do want to take a little bit of a second to kind of touch on Miami a little bit. That was a rough first year for Mario Cristobal and the Canes. And, they did exactly what we thought, as you're a college football fan, obviously they recruited very well in that 2023 class. They finished number 8 overall. They brought in a whole bunch of talent on the offensive line. They brought in like the top 2 of the top 5 offensive tackles in Samson Okunlola, I believe is his last name. And then obviously Francis Magula. I can't pronounce that. I'm sorry. But obviously they had the really solid recruiting class, but then everything sort of fell apart this cycle. And there's a lot of controversy surrounding Miami right now with the John Ruiz and Life Wallet scandal, who's kind of pioneering their NIL. Obviously, there are other players in their NIL. I'm not saying like he's the only NIL figure in Miami, but he was the most outspoken. And now with them in a lot of trouble, coming into this season, their recruiting is really down right now this cycle. They've landed a couple of targets that were big time, but Dylan Stewart, one of their big-time defensive linemen they're waiting on, just committed to South Carolina today. So they've missed a lot of guys. And so coming into the season, how ready can some of those freshmen be? And then, Tyler Van Dyke obviously is a fantastic quarterback. He has the potential to be a fantastic quarterback. We haven't seen it. Yeah. He has the tools to be very good, but we haven't seen that yet. And some people blame their offensive coordinator switches. Some people are, it's the right fit. But he's the guy coming in week 1. So what does that look like? What does that do? Their schedule, obviously, isn't – I wouldn't say it's necessarily difficult. Wouldn't say it's necessarily easy either. But, if I'm looking at the trajectory of those 2 ACC teams, Florida State and Miami, obviously from the state of Florida, Florida State far and away. So kind of like what you were saying, I don't see Miami as much of a threat to the national picture. As some people are predicting they have a big year. I'm not buying that hype again. I didn't buy it last year, but I certainly wouldn't be buying it this year, given last year. So, all in all, all three teams potentially trending upward, but if I was being, maybe it's the fan in me because I don't like Miami, but I just don't see it yet.
None of us do. Chris, unless you like Miami for some reason, I don't know.
Oh man, let me tell you what, the Hurricanes are going. No. That's Van Dyke. I really was high on him going into last season and just laid an egg. The whole team did. So. I'm done. I'm done with him. prove me wrong, but okay. I'm off that bandwagon quick.
Well, I'll give them 2 minutes. This is a 2-minute warning. It starts now. Here's the Miami Hurricane schedule. Tell me how many victories you think we have. Host Miami of Ohio. Host Texas A&M. Host Bethune-Cookman. At Temple. Host Georgia Tech. At North Carolina. Host Clemson. Host Virginia. At NC State, at Florida State, host Louisville, at Boston College. I'll start with you, Jarad.
High side 4, maybe, but look, I don't want to be that guy, but is Miami of Ohio like a guaranteed W? I'm not trying to be that guy, but we saw it last season. And I know I followed their recruiting. I followed their moves. I know that they've gotten a little bit better at some of those positions, and I know that they've made moves. And I know that Mario Cristobal is in year 2 now instead of year 1. But it's a brand new OC. It's a brand new system. You're making changes on the fly already. You've already made changes to your coaching staff from year 1 to year 2. That's not a good sign. So, four W's. I don't know.
What do you got, Chris?
I think they'll surprise us and go 5.
5? I mean, the highlight of the last 2 seasons was a cat falling off the upper deck into somebody's hand. So, I mean, there hasn't been a lot to. I mean, seriously, it's been pretty bad. And who was it that lost to last year, Jared? I forget. Was it Kent State or somebody stupid?
It was. Oh no, I remember what it was.
Was it a MAC team or something?
Yeah. And I remember watching that game and thinking, like, why is this not close? Like, why is this?
Yeah.
I mean, it was, and just when you thought, like, okay, well, maybe they've caught their stride. No, they didn't.
Middle Tennessee.
No, there you go. Thank you.
Yeah.
Middle Tennessee. And, like, North Carolina is a sneaky good team in the ACC, so that's not a win. You're not going to beat Clemson. I mean, you're probably not going to beat Virginia. I mean, Virginia is pretty bad. So if you can't get over a team like that, you just, Virginia is only 5 years away from losing back-to-back years to Richmond. And they're beating Miami. I mean, that's, well, maybe another time, but I'm like, that's why I'm glad the ACC is getting rid of divisions. You're like, gee whiz, the Coastal was so pathetic.
Drake May there in North Carolina is probably going to be, Heisman for early on the season.
Yeah.
And I don't think that North Carolina can play good enough around him for him to win the Heisman, but that's a guy if you're a team like a Florida or even like, Miami, or like if you're a middle of the road team and you're that's not a quarterback you want to play. Like at the end of the day, the best quarterback's going to get a W in those situations. And Drake May is one of the best to do it. So North Carolina to me is not even on the table.
That's why game day is going there week 1. I want to see him, which makes sense. And I'm glad Florida State doesn't play him. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Because our defense, I don't know that that's not a win. Go ahead.
Yeah. I'm glad they're finally going to settle who's the real Miami. Week 1.
Oh my God.
I've been wondering for years.
It's still in question. That's the sad part.
I mean, since 2001. I mean, that's the last time I could definitively say which one's the real Miami. So I don't know.
Yeah, it's been a while.
That's terrible. Just a quick note, and you guys we've talked about this before. It's just a sad thing to see. Honestly, like what Miami's become. It's really sad. And hey, I mean, I'm glad to see the fall because I have many jokes about it. But when they built the ACC around these Florida State and Miami programs, they thought we'll put them in opposite sides. They'll play each other every year in the ACC title game. It'll be in Jacksonville or Tampa. You're going to have a packed out stadium. It's been an embarrassment. Miami has never played Florida State. They made the title game one time under Richt, and Florida State's won it several. It's bad.
I think that you could probably do a whole show on the downfall of Miami, but I did, recently, I watched the 30 for 30s and I watched both of the Miami ESPN 30 for 30s, and talking about both of those runs, and like the swagger and all that stuff. And I get it. Like obviously there was a team that recruited well. I think the big thing that I think you can take, and Florida State and Miami all, is that, in those days, in the 90s and early 2000s, when those teams were all three really competing well, it was a war down here in the Sunshine State. But what you've really seen with the emergence of even before, but Nick Saban in Alabama, obviously everybody's going to point to Dabo Swinney and Clemson, and especially Ryan Day at Ohio State right now. Is those schools are coming down, and everyone's talking about it. Everyone knows it, but those schools are coming down and taking your top Florida talent. I mean, if you look at this year, right? Most of your top 10 guys from the state, top 20 guys in the state aren't going to Miami, Florida State, or Florida, right? Yeah. Georgia, Auburn, even Auburn's I think has come down and taken one, but Alabama, Ohio State for sure, and then Clemson's are coming down and really rating your top talent, and Miami unfortunately has suffered the worst of that, I think, and I think that we would all agree on that. I think even if you're a Miami fan in here, they would say it's really hurt us most. And you look at what Brian Hartline has done with the wide receiving room there in Ohio State, and most of those guys are from Florida. Look at Alabama's run with Jerry Jeudy and Calvin Ridley and all those guys that were big. A lot of those guys were from Florida. So, I mean, I think the part of the reason that you've seen that, not only inconsistency in coaching hires, I think Miami was ready to play the big time money college football game that the other schools were prepared, but also just, South Florida kids are not loyal.
Amen to that. Chris, you got any thoughts? I got a couple. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I'm curious, Brandon, what's your mindset going into the Texas A&M game? Like, where are you at? Who are you rooting for? How do you want that to play out?
So, honestly, I stole something from Jarad a long time ago about Urban Meyer, where it was like, hey, Urban Meyer's a liar, but you know what? Who cares? Or that's the way the sport is. And that's kind of the way Jimbo kind of left Florida State. Mm-hmm. So I've kind of had that mentality ever since then. I'm like, you know what? If he does bad, he deserves it. If he's great, he was a great coach for us. I knew he would go somewhere and do well. So it's kind of surprising me, just to be completely honest, that he hasn't done it yet. Also, he was put in a very tough situation, right? I mean, could you have put him in a harder division, a harder place to succeed? I mean, my goodness. LSU, Bama, every year. What exactly did they expect for $10 million a year? I don't know. Now with Miami, they just haven't had great coaches for the last 20 years. I mean, Larry Coker came in and inherited a gold mine, and he piggybacked off of all the players and everything that was happening up to that point. But, I mean, Al Golden? Seriously? I mean, Mario Cristobal was actually kind of a good fit and has been for a long time. I think he coached at FAU before he went to Oregon. And so, he's probably a natural fit for that, but then so was their last coach who really, really stunk it up. And so, going into that game, it's kind of like LSU, Florida State. Just honestly, give me a close one. I don't really care who wins. The last one was kind of a good one, too, because it was a low defensive game. It was raining. It was low scoring. It was kind of a pathetic game to watch. And you're like, oh, good. Okay, I'm pretty satisfied with neither team actually doing well. And one team has to win. So there you go. Who knows? You beat Cincy, good for you. Win at Memphis, you win at Tulane, that was a fun one. Lose at home to Navy, no one can figure out the triple option. You lose at South Florida, the last time you're probably ever going to play the Bulls, so I hope you enjoyed that. All the ESPN media who knew nothing about the state of Florida, oh, it's a rivalry game. They never even played every year, so good luck knowing what you're talking about. They rematch against Tulane and they lose in the title game pretty badly. They lose at Duke in the... Was that the Mayo Bowl? Was that the one with mayonnaise? Yeah. So, I mean, good for them. Gus did turn some things around. He had a pretty good presence with the offense, but there were a lot of games he just didn't seem to show up for some reason, and the offense just disappeared. You lose Bowser this year. You probably keep your running quarterback approach like he's been doing for a long time. They're probably 65% run, which is different from most of the country. Don't know how that translates into the Big 12 in this season. They have a lot of new opponents, and I'm probably going to take the UCF probably 7-5 because they have a lot of new teams they're playing. Maybe 8-4 at the best.
Yeah, I'm thinking 7-5 to going through their schedule, about the same. Just out of curiosity, Brandon, who do you think will end up being their rivals? Like, guessing Cincinnati?
Actually, it's probably going to be Houston. They're going to play up the Space Coast thing, which is like Cape Canaveral in Florida versus Houston. You know, we have a problem. But it seems distant, right? It doesn't seem real. It's not a natural rivalry. There's nobody in the state that they're going to play anymore. You know, yes, South Florida was like 75 minutes away, and it doesn't work. The Big 12 is spread across so many different states. Where like you're gonna who's your close? Literally, if I were to ask you who's the closest team to Orlando in the Big 12, it's probably Cincinnati.
Okay,
and that makes no sense at all because there's West Virginia and Houston maybe.
I do have some thoughts on UCF. I would like to talk to, but Brandon, how sustainable do you think that is? So, you know, like for the Big 12 conference, obviously bringing Colorado back and trying to get a big TV deal, like. how sustainable do you think that is as we like look into like a new world of college football with just these like weird sort of matchups?
That's a wonderful question. What you really have to watch out for are the sports that are not football and men's basketball. So early on in the Big 12, West Virginia was struggling mighty hard with keeping up with that. If I got to send women's volleyball, soccer, other sports to travel to Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas repeatedly, I got to keep up with the travel expense. UCF probably has this in their back pocket that they have the largest enrollment in the United States, maybe behind Arizona State, but they're top 2. So they got the money. That's probably why they were asked to join in the first place. What surprised me was that South Florida was not asked to join with them. I made jokes at their expense, but they're a big TV market. So if you take Orlando, Tampa together, they're probably a top 12 TV market in the U.S., which is a lot of deal rights. Did y'all see what the Big Ten got from USC, UCLA joining? It's ridiculous. So if you would have played your cards right and taken them together, maybe it's a different story. But UCF's probably going to be fine on their own. So the travel expense for me is like, okay, UCF has a men's soccer team. Who in the Big 12 plays men's soccer? I couldn't tell you. No clue. Most of the Big 12, as I was raised in that area, and you were too, Jared, they have wrestling. UCF has no wrestling. How are you going to fit in with that sport? How does that work? Do your dividends and all of your rights go to fund the sport you're not even participating in? That's a tough question to answer. I think they're going to be fine, but the years are have to go to Colorado to Boulder. That's a tough one. UCF does go to Boise State this year. That's a big travel expense too. If you were to turn these things around and keep appearing in bowls, keep contributing to your conference, and I don't know if the Big 12 does distribution of bowl allotments, but they better take as much as they can this year from OU and Texas before those guys jet over to you, which is a sensible move. I like it. They're keeping the Red Rivalry game, correct, in Dallas?
Yeah. That was not a non-negotiable.
I figured. Yeah. So I think UCF is going to be okay just because of the money they can bring in and contribute to the conference. The other schools, I really don't know.
One thing that I would like to say about UCF is, I'm not big on Gus. Just like for me, on the outside looking in, like I never thought he was that great of a coach, and I really thought his system was all that, whatever. Even when he was his Auburn days and kind of coming up through the ranks, like I've never been that high on Gus Malzahn. And when UCF hired him, it kind of felt like when Texas Tech hired Tommy Tuberville to me. But obviously, he has done some good things there. And you talk about like kind of stabilizing the program, bringing in John Rice Plumlee to kind of maybe be the trigger man there and kind of run that weird Gus Malzahn offense. But he's also done some pretty good things. So John Walker was a big-time defensive tackle, 14th best defensive tackle in the country. Florida wanted him really bad last year. He ended up going to UCF. You had another kid named Isaiah Nixon, who was from St. Pete, pretty talented ed guy there, 6'4", 215. Won't contribute this year, but going in, there's some talent there. And then you look at what Gus did through the portal. There's some definitely pieces that I liked that when I saw him. The big name is, though, Derek LeBlanc, who was a big-time Florida defensive tackle last year, went to OU, transferred before the season started. He's going to be at UCF. This year as a true freshman. He's the guy that might be able to contribute early. I think that obviously Walker is the guy that's going to be, to me, the one to watch. And then, of course, all Florida fans should know about Trent Whittemore, right? Mm-hmm. So Trent Whittemore, big time. I don't know big time, but definitely a solid piece at the wide receiver position, transferring from Gainesville to UCF. And I would imagine Chris probably going to get a lot of touches there too, right? I mean, he's talented. He's got some speed. He's a tall kid, 6'4", and very athletic. So,
yeah, I mean, just speaking to him, that's one of those like kind of question marks with Florida. Like, every time the ball was thrown to him, he caught it, but he just couldn't get on the field. And so it really stunk seeing him leave, but that's a solid guy for sure. Will they throw it to him? I don't know how he fits into the offense. But you throw him to him, he's gonna catch it, and he's gonna be very productive. With Malzahn, I know, Brandon, you mentioned that he would have these great games offensively, then not show up. I mean, it's the same thing at Auburn. You saw the same thing, and he would upset somebody and then get ahead of steam, and then he would struggle at home against Troy or something like that. And he was just kind of, what were you thinking? What are you doing? So I mean, it's the same exact. I don't know how long that can last at that. I don't know. But maybe a school like UCF in the Big 12, maybe that's perfect fit for him. But it was the same old song and dance. Just when you get some momentum, you trip, and that's him.
Is Plumlee going to be the guy there, Brandon?
Yeah, he's the guy. And I mean, they're rushing for probably 260 a game and throwing for 140. So if you're saying like 400, then they're pretty much 2/3 running the ball. Now, what I want to see is like Javon Baker, this guy transferred from OU like 3 years ago, and he's been a stud for UCF in the passing game. But the problem is they don't use him. So I'm curious, when you see a lot of drop off of their running back position, do they use him more? Do they use it one more on a more consistent basis? You do travel to OU this year. How does that factor into that? That's an interesting game for the UCF Knights, because Dylan Gabriel was here for a while and he was the guy of the future, and all of a sudden he gets hurt against Louisville a couple years ago and he's like, you know what, I'm just gonna cash it out. He didn't tell anybody, and then like after 6 weeks he was like, I broke my shoulder. He was eligible to play last month of the year, and he said, no, I'm just gonna sit out. I'm not gonna do it. And it wasn't like I'm still hurt kind of deal. He's like, I just didn't want to. He's kind of laissez-faire about it. So then you have Javon Baker come back, and this is the only game. They don't play Texas this year. They're at Oklahoma. UCF was the only school out of the Big 12 joining that doesn't play either Texas or OU at home.
They got hosed.
I was like, oh, they playing this around them. I don't know if they're scared. I mean, UCF, they're the small teenagers of the college football. They're like, oh yeah, we had an undefeated season. We deserve this. I'm like, you have no idea what you're going into. Just relax. All right, just calm down. But we got to go to Oklahoma. I'm like, yeah, you do. And you're lucky enough to host Texas or something stupid like that. But that it could be an interesting game.
That, to me, that's a tough schedule. I mean, right? Because like obviously you're going to go to Norman, which is it's a tough place to play. I mean, it's not very. I've been in Norman a bunch of times, right? It's the fans are great. There's a lot of tradition there. I don't think it's an SEC environment, when you look at like the Swamp or you look at Baton Rouge or some of those places, Sanford Stadium in Georgia, like I don't think it's that sort of environment. I don't think they're that rowdy, but it's a very, quote unquote hostile environment. Oklahoma fans do show up. Oklahoma State should be a pretty solid game. Now they get them at home, they get the Cowboys at home, and then going to Jones Stadium to play Texas Tech. The UCF fan base will find out that Texas Tech fans are not cool people at all. In fact, they're like the worst fan base ever to go see a away game at. So definitely, my fair warning to them. Like Lubbock is not only is Lubbock an absolute dumpster fire of a place to go, but their fan base is like mutant, like just gross, like mean people.
Jarad,
and they throw tortillas, and I don't know, man.
Are you talking about Texas Tech or LSU?
Oh my,
Texas, yeah, definitely. Definitely
it sounded a lot like LSU.
Wow.
Texas Tech is like that, but then like way less cool because there's nothing fun there. Like the food, I mean, barbecue is good, I guess, in Lubbock, but I don't know. Like, if any of my Texas Tech fans or friends like listen to this, they know like I don't like Lubbock. So.
And that's funny. I had a friend that went there, and the thing he kept bragging about was the land they had. It was like the biggest university by land size, and I'm like,
yeah, the biggest like. But I'm like, why do I want to trek across the desert to go to class? Like, I don't. How is that a hype? I don't
exactly. Oh man. Okay, so yeah, let me run through their schedule real quick. And then it's kind of interesting here. They play Kansas State at home, at Boise State, Villanova, at Kansas State, who won the Big 12 last year.
Okay.
Host Baylor, at Kansas, week off, at OU, host West Virginia, at Cincinnati, host Oklahoma State. That one I'm going to Florida State, Miami. Otherwise, I would go to that game. We talked about this in a past episode. I'm sensitive to the Pokes. I love the Cowboys. At Texas Tech, November 18th. God, it's the end of the year, Jarad. And then you host Houston, November 25th. So another reason to think, Chris, that Houston's the one they're going to pump up as a rival.
Okay.
That's a tough schedule, man. And if 2 years ago or whatever, we may be saying like, oh, that's not bad. But with the emergence of Kansas and Kansas State and what they've been doing the past couple of years in the Big 12, those are not easy. Those are not easy teams to play and not easy places to play them. I was fortunate enough to go to the Kansas TCU game at Kansas last year, and that was kind of eye opening. A very small stadium, kind of looks like a big high school in Texas.
Okay.
Where I grew up, but the fans were great. They were loud, and that was a phenomenal game. TCU, I think, ended up pulling out the end. But Kansas is definitely going to be a fun team to watch, a fun team to play. In Kansas State, obviously, they have it dialed in too. So, the Cowboys you mentioned. I've spent a lot of time in Stillwater too, and so that's another really decent team. I would say that's those 4 or 5 opponents. You met Houston. You mentioned like that. That's a rough schedule. I think year one in the Big 12.
I mean, it's all completely new, familiar opponents, and that can really ravage your game plan and some stuff. Which is why I tried to, the UCF fans I know, which is very few, just to be like, taper expectations. The Big 12 is good. You're on your way up. Just expect a bowl game this year. You just get to 6-6, and that's probably a good year for you.
Yeah. Yeah, even Texas Tech is a decent team, even though where they play football is maybe the worst place on the planet.
Oh man, God, this feels right, doesn't it? Just talking about college football, this is wonderful.
Back.
Yeah, we covered a lot. We got the Noles and the Gators from last year into this year. Knights too, a little bit of Miami. Thank you again, fans. This is Brandon from FloridaFocusPodcast.com, bringing you some more college football content as we head into the 2023 season. Stay tuned as Chris, Jarad, and Brandon continue our discussion, this time on conference realignment and NIL. Thank you.